Hello all, and as you can see by the video, it's pretty obvious what I'm going to talk about. And I don't usually talk about when wrestlers die. It's just not something I like coming on here and kind of talking about. I think I've only done it twice. Well, three times. I take it back. I did it when Moolah died. I did it when Benoit died, and that was more of to do with a lot of what was going on and a lot of the rumors that were going on at the time. I did it when Misawa died because that was Misawa, and I think that's the only ones I've ever done. I might be leaving some people out but I normally don't do when wrestlers die type thing. Just not something I usually like talking about for various reasons. But of course, Tuesday night, Warrior died. He passed away, possibly of a heart attack. Um, was walking out from his hotel to his car with his wife and collapsed. And so far, that's all we know. Maybe by the time this video comes up, maybe we'll know more. I don't know, because of how long it takes YouTube to stick stuff up now. But what has gotten me about this is just how many people just have gone, I've seen that, aren't even necessarily wrestling fans anymore who just, they were fans of this guy. And all of the people talking about him and people, all of this stuff. I've had customers who know that I'm a pro wrestling fan. They're roughly about my age that have been coming in, and they know I'm a wrestling fan. They know I'm a big wrestling fan, and of course everybody at work knows I'm a big wrestling fan, and I work in a mall, so a lot of the people that I know just by working in a mall, some of those people know I'm a very big wrestling fan, and they they've asked me about this stuff. They've asked me about him and if I what I thought and this, that, and the other. It was just kind of surprising going through Twitter the last few days and just seeing everyone talking about it. The Nancy Grace stuff I'm not going to talk about because that's just Nancy Grace being Nancy Grace. Just all of that stuff, and I know I've said it on here before. I probably haven't said it maybe in a couple years, but I've always felt that you had a generation of wrestling fans that Hulk Hogan brought to the table, so to speak, the big banquet table. He brought them to the table, and then I would say that Ric Flair is the one that got them coming back to the banquet table. And after this week, I seriously think I have to put a little amendment to that because when Randy Savage passed away, it was a big deal, but Randy Savage was the #2 guy in the company during, the WWE's biggest, part of the company. He was there for the NWO. He was, in the spotlight for a long period of time. He was in, he was in movies. His voice was all over the place. That I got. He had much more exposure than a lot of other pro wrestlers ever had. Warrior, not so much. And so to have all these people just all of a sudden just go crazy like when Savage died, it's kind of telling in a lot of ways. So with Warrior, I think like I said, Hogan brought everybody to the table. Flair kept people coming back to the table. I think once I think Hogan brought everyone to the table, kind of like, okay, what's this? And then I really think now that Warrior was the one that kind of like, ooh, I really like this more than I like whatever Hogan is. I like this. And, just talking to the people I know, that seemed to be the case. I was never, I'm not going to say I wasn't a Hogan fan, but I was never the biggest Hogan fan. When, I can remember the Warrior when he was Dingo Warrior, and I always remember thinking, oh, he's pretty cool, but that mustache has got to go. And then, of course, he became the Ultimate Warrior, and, I was a big fan. I wouldn't say a big fan. I was a fan of his more than I was Hogan at that point. And then my brother, who's 6 years younger than me, he massive Warrior fan. That was his, I would say without question, his favorite wrestler. He had the wrestling buddy of his. He had also, he had numerous action figures of his. He had all sorts of stuff of his. That was his guy. And I can remember as a kid, and as I've been listening to people talk about it, I think the thing with Warrior that was different than Hogan and different than everybody else was the fact that, you know, in a lot of ways he was always kind of joked. You know, people always made fun of him because he would act like this. But I think it's very true that he was a living, breathing superhero. And to a lot of people, he was what, oh, look at this guy. This guy is just like he walked off of a comic book page. And I think that says a lot. You know, the guy, without a doubt, had his faults. I mean, the guy, for whatever, I mean, the guy completely, you know, like I said, he looks like he died of a heart attack. We all know that, you know, steroids can lead to that. He always said that, you know, yes, he did steroids, but he always did it the way you're supposed to do steroids, i.e., you know, limited doses. You cycle correctly, and when you do that stuff, that's when it all gets confusing, because that's when, you know, you look at the facts, and that's when, you know, the bodybuilders go, well, when you do that, and you do it that way, and you're over the age of 21, and your body has stopped really developing, and you do all of that stuff, you know, the risks that, you know, when you abuse it aren't there. Like I said, that's what they say. I'm not saying that's, but I'm just saying that's, and he always said that, and there's evidence to support that. If you really go out and you research it, there's evidence to support that. Not saying I agree with it, but there's evidence to support it. For a discussion, which there really has never really been a discussion on it. If you want to see a really good piece on it, there was a HBO, their sports show. I can't think of the name of the show now. They did a really good piece on it more than a couple years ago, on it that I'm sure you can find somewhere. But Real Sports, they did a piece on it, which was, you know, talked about all this stuff. But he always said that was how he did it, and that was his biggest gripe with people who, you know, had died of steroid abuse, was that, you know, they weren't doing it the right way, they were doing it, you know, the wrong way, this, that, and the other. So there was that. There was the whole Heath Ledger thing. You know, the guy was a guy of his convictions, and he definitely believed stuff that, you know, offended people. There's no getting around that. But the guy stuck with his beliefs. He stuck with his convictions. He did that even in business, even in the WWE, which definitely, you know, when you hear guys, is one of the reasons why guys didn't like him. He wasn't, not to say he wasn't one of the boys, but if you hear stuff about him, he wasn't one of, you know, he wasn't like the other guys. He didn't like doing the same stuff with other guys. He was kind of kept to himself in a lot of ways because he wanted to stay away from some of that stuff. And that's what he's always said, and that's what people's always kind of said about him, but there's conflicting reports even on that. He's a very, you know, he's a guy with just a very interesting guy when you get behind that. And I don't mean like interesting as, oh, that's cool, interesting. I just mean it's fascinating guy, I guess would be a better way to put it. I will tell you that, you know, and I just said all that, but I will tell you, when, you know, we all saw the Hall of Fame speech. I'm sure, well, probably most of the people up here. So if you haven't seen the Hall of Fame speech, you should go see it. It was really good. Though watching it, it did look like something was wrong with him. I mean, it looked like his blood pressure was continually going up. He looked like he was out of breath, the whole thing. Same thing with the Raw. I mean, he didn't look good on both shows. So, you know, there was that. And I know other people have said that too, but it's the truth. But, you know, WWE released that, you know, that first DVD, and he talked about that DVD. And I will tell you, it took me a long time to watch that DVD, because as soon as I figured it was going to be a hatchet job, when it came out and people said how much of a hatchet job it was, I wasn't going to watch it. And one of the things, you know, I don't get on here and talk a lot about WWE DVDs, and I know I get a lot of people asking, you know, why don't you and a lot of it has to do with the fact that I cannot stand, figure a lot of DVDs that come out now. I watched a lot of that stuff, and when they rewrite history, it annoys me. It's one of the things that on the network, it annoys me a lot, because they show these you know, these history things, and they're basically rewriting history. And, you know, hey, you know, they're the #1. destroyed all their competition. They can rewrite history as they want. But when you go back and you look at the DVDs that are really good, and look, you're never gonna get a definitive history on stuff, because with wrestling it's all mucked up anyways, history-wise. But when they do a really good job of getting most of the history right, the DVDs are usually really good and they're really fascinating. And I know a lot of people that I know who, will watch a WWE DVD and they think, oh, that's what really happened, and it's like, that's not what really happened. And I mean, for example, the the stories about WrestleMania 1, a lot of those are far more fascinating, the real stories, than the stuff like WWE has released. Now a lot of the stuff they would never really talk about, the stuff with Mr. T, the stuff, just how much trouble they were in, you know, how much of a success it really was, was it really the first pay-per-view, all of that sort of stuff. But yeah, I mean, it's, that, to me, that's a far more fascinating thing. And when they came out with that DVD, I really felt like it was just like, and I eventually did see it, and I was just like, good God. I mean, even when I saw the excerpts on the commercials, and they would say some of the stuff, like about his promos, I remember, and I've never talked to anybody that when they were a kid who didn't understand what Warrior was saying. Yes, it was wacky, and it was crazy, and it was something out of like a metal song, or something out of a comic, like a fantasy comic book, but you got what he was saying. You got what he was trying, and it sounded, like I said, he sounded like a superhero. He sounded like, a guy from a fantasy, comic, or a an over-the-top, not really a fantasy novel, but of like a, maybe fantasy movie. Just talking weird, crazy, cryptic, just craziness. And, so, and you had guys who definitely grew up in that time period, and for them to say that just was always like, okay, are we saying that looking back on it? I don't think so, and that's not what they were saying. I'm glad they were able to do the DVD they just released. It's kind of sad they released it and then he dies. I would have liked to have seen, a real history of him, telling his version of events and saying, kind of what he did and that aspect of it. But and maybe we will get that at some point. I know the network said they were going to do, like a tribute thing to Warrior on Wednesday. It was either yesterday. I think it might have been Wednesday. And I know that's not exactly what happened, I guess. I don't know. So hopefully they can piece together something pretty quick. The Daniel Bryan thing they did, which was excellent, by the way, if you haven't seen it, was really good. But so it was. I'm glad WWE was able to do that. I'm glad that for all the people always mistaken this, that I always that I hate Triple H. I just hate him, and I can't see past the hate. And that's not true. I've always when the Jeff Hardy stuff went down, I came on here and said you can't give that guy a title, and here's why. And I was proven right. I was like, you can't do that. So I completely understand that. That's a different thing. And I would never say that he got where he was simply because he married the boss's daughter. He was on his way to not where he is today, but he was on wrestling wise as a wrestler. He was he was on his way. Would he have been as successful? Who knows? We don't know. But he was already up in the upper echelons of the WWE before then. So that doesn't really matter. I don't think that had anything to do with it. I've always said I thought the guy had a good mind for business. It seems like it. The problem is that he usually let ego get in his way, and that just infuriated me even more. But I think that you have to give the devil his due, and the fact of the matter is that he got Bruno into the Hall of Fame, which people never thought would happen if you've ever followed that stuff. And I hope that they do a DVD about Bruno, talking just about that, talking about and being honest about it. When they did that segment on at WrestleMania, and it was Rock and Austin and Hogan, and I don't know, maybe, and like I said in my WrestleMania vid, maybe Bruno physically wouldn't be able to do that, but for Bruno Sammartino to be in that ring too, so he had all four of them in there, and people could just understand the importance Bruno has. you know, for the history of that company. He may be the single most important guy in the history of that company. You know, I mean, you could argue that point. You know, you could argue that point. But he also, you know, he somehow got Warrior to, you know, to come around too and to make amends, and it seemed like he was happy. We all, I'm sure most people saw the picture of him and Vince together, which I never thought would happen, but there was that. So that was good, and that's good because I mean, you go back and you look. I mean, the him and Jake feud, the Savage feud. He had good feuds. Was he the best wrestler in the world? No, far from it. But he was, for what he was, for a big muscle-bound guy that went out there and just, you know, and people went, oh my God, look at this guy, oh, and, you know, that sort of thing. And like I said, a superhero who literally just jumped off the, he was great at it, and he was perfect for it. You know, when he came back in WCW, which he was even more of a comic book hero, especially that first night, which I watched, and I don't know too many other people that watched, and it was, you know, and basically, if you don't know the story, he was brought back, basically so Hogan could get his win back, and then, you know, WCW paid him, and we didn't really see him ever again. Now, you know, he didn't do the business they thought he was going to do, but you're not going to tell me you couldn't find something for him to do. You couldn't tell me that at some point, you know, you couldn't have found something for him to do. You couldn't have, you know, used him somehow so that he wasn't just sitting at home. But so is, you know, the history of WCW. Yeah, personally, like I said, I always found him very fascinating. I'd watch his YouTube videos and be shocked by what he said and perplexed by what he said, and also kind of like, okay, I see kind of where he's going. Like I said, he was a guy by his own convictions, and you know, it's hard, no matter what you think of somebody, when they're that, when they're true to their convictions to the point where everyone's going to be hypocritical to some degree. I think it's hard not to be, but if you specifically go out of your way to try to not be at some points, and it could have been. I don't know him personally. You know, and I'm sure we'll find out all sorts of more stuff about him as time goes on. But you know, I just find it very fascinating that this guy, who, you know, had a very short run and a very, thing, just magically became, you know, he dies and people come out of the woodwork, and I think it really showed his impact on pro wrestling and how important he was to pro wrestling in that time period in WWE, so, or WWF, or whatever you want to call it, or WWF as he called it. That was a pretty good. He got his dig at McDivitt. I guess that's pretty much all I have to say. Yeah. Sad. You know, you saw him with his daughters, and you could tell that he loved his daughters very much. I mean, for him to, you know, how many times have we ever seen, you know, the daughters of some guy walk them out for the Hall of Fame? How many times, you know, his wife, who he, you know, you could tell she just was, you know, proud of him, and his kids never got to see anything he ever did. And I really hope that, you know, him going to the Hall of Fame, him going to Raw, and then dying the next day, I mean, I'm sure that's very traumatic. I hope at some point that they get to see what their dad did, because I think, you know, I really do. I hope they get to see what his dad did. Maybe as they get older, they'll start to blame the business a little bit, and, you know, you can't really blame them. But like I also said, you know, he always took responsibility for that. He always said, hey, I did steroids. This is how I did them. You know, that whole thing. He was never, you know, he never shied away from, you know, like 1,000 other guys. Never shied away from that. You have to give him props there. May have been what killed him. We don't know. As far as we know, it could have been an aneurysm. You know, he could have just plopped over, you know, plopped over for that. You know, we don't know. He could have been sick for some time. There's some speculation about that too, and that, you know, he was holding on and holding on. So, I'm sure we'll find out. I'm sure we'll find out lots more. But like I said, it's a fascinating thing, because I think, you know, this is always it. You don't realize what somebody is until they're gone. And I think this opened a lot of people's eyes to just how big the Warrior really was. Because that night of the Hall of Fame, I had had 4 people over here to watch the Hall of Fame. The Hall of Fame. I mean, that's pretty surprising to me. Just is. I mean, it's the Hall of Fame, and they were here to see Warrior. I mean, that's what they were here to see. So there was all that. So, anyways, I guess I'm done. I guess this will be up whenever it's up, whenever YouTube decides it needs to go up. So, anyways, with that, I'm out of here. I'll talk to you later.